Welcome to Unshakable Belief, the podcast for anyone ready to break free from burnout, reclaim their health, and rise into the life they were meant to live. I'm Monica Connolly, your host. I am an international best-selling author, a trauma-informed coach, and a speaker. I know what it feels like to carry the weight of the world while slowly losing yourself in the process because I've been there. Through chronic illness, identity loss, and survival mode, I had to rebuild from the inside out. This show is where real transformation begins through raw conversations, expert insights, and mindset shifting solo episodes. You'll get the tools, stories, and support to reset your body, rewire your thoughts, and step boldly into your next chapter. You are not here by accident, and your story is far from over. Let's begin. Today, I get the privilege of sitting down with not just an incredible advocate, but a dear friend, Kim Witzcak. Kim's story is powerful. Born out of unthinkable loss, she's become one of the most passionate voices for patient safety and drug accountability in our country. She's taken her personal experience and turned it into a mission, making sure families everywhere know how to ask the right questions, speak up, and protect themselves and their loved ones. Beyond all of her national advocacy work and her role with the FDA, Kim is someone I deeply admire for her courage, resilience, and her heart for helping others. I know this conversation is going to not only inform you, but inspire you to step more fully into your own power when it comes to your health and healing. Kim, I am so honored to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Monica. It's really fun to see you again and have this conversation.
Well, I know that your journey into advocacy didn't start because you set out to change policy or to sit at the FDA tables. It started because of something really personal. So, for those who may not know your story, can you take us back and share how it all began?
Sure. Well, you are absolutely right. I would never have chose to do this work. That's why I call myself the accidental advocate. And I've learned, a lot of things that change in the world are because of something that has happened to someone. So I start that out because I think that's a really important message that when something happens, that's usually when something motivates you to to go change the trajectory for someone else because it didn't. So anyways, I say that, but August 2003, which is 22 years ago, I got a call that literally changed the course of my life. My entire world blew up in that phone call. My dad called to tell me that my husband of 10 years was found dead. And he wasn't just found dead, but he was found that he took his own life. And I was like, "What?" I was I was out of town when my dad found him, but back up, Woody didn't have a history of depression. He wasn't depressed. And so it was like, "What? What?" Like literally my entire world crashed at that moment. And 5 weeks earlier, Woody had just gone on an antidepressant for insomnia from his GP. And he was having trouble sleeping. He had just started his dream job with a startup company. And I call it the entrepreneur 3 a.m. wake up call. And when it wakes you up in the middle of the night, and he was a guy that always needed 8 hours of sleep. Like he'd be at dinner parties and he would fall asleep. And so if he was tired. So anyways, but Wood was an athlete. Like they fixed him. He broke his arm. They put him in a cast. His knees, they did surgery, got stitches because somebody bit him playing basketball. And so he always would say doctors don't get paid enough for the work they do because they always made him better, right? He was Humpty Dumpty. And so he went to his GP that he trusted and said he wasn't sleeping within, probably a 5-minute conversation. Those conversations are pretty quick at the doctor's office. He ended up leaving with a 3-week sample pack of Zoloft. And I was out of the country those first 3 weeks. He was on the drug. I come home and he is like, walks through our back door. He's telling me his head's outside his body. He's like, "You got to help me, Kim. I don't know what's happening to me. My head," he's like crying. And I'm like, And so we calmed him down and told him, he called the doctor, and the doctor said, "You got to give it 4 to 6 weeks to kick in." And he lasted literally another week of his life, and every night he would come home, "Kim, what about acupuncture? What about hypnosis? What about this?" And so when I went out of town, because it was my busy time of year of my work, and we both traveled all the time. So like traveling was nothing out of the ordinary for us. So when I left, I mean, I'm just thinking, "Oh, I'll see you on Friday." It's just like a quick week. And literally my world crashed. And when that happens, like, not only do you just sit, I mean, you just kind of go, "I don't even know who I am anymore," all of that. But you also sit in an opportunity to have to, like, especially when it doesn't make sense. Like, if Woody was, even if I think, even if he had depression and all that, it would still be a hard one. But I was like, what?
Mhm.
Like, what? And so really that started I call it the curiosity, unpeeling the onion to go, what happened? And I think you kind of go in on an investigation. So anyways, that's
Yeah.
kind of the backstory. It's how I got into this work as the accidental advocate, but I do it so that no other family has to learn the hard way and say, "How come we didn't know?" Because that's what I did. I had to say, "How come we didn't know? Like, this is ridiculous."
Right. So looking back, is that really going through this experience, is that when you really realized that the system wasn't working the way that you thought it was?
Oh, 100%. I think there's, like, a little bit of an ignorant bliss or the illusion of, systems protecting you. I don't think I ever thought twice about the healthcare system, right? I think we've been taught blindly to trust, right? Doctors know more than you. They went to school. They know your body. And so you just blindly trust. The doctor gives it to you and you see ads on TV, which I'm in the advertising business. So you don't actually, I never thought twice about it. Like, of course, no company's going to sell a product that doesn't work or could harm you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all the things that I thought. And then, I think the doctors also blindly trust the regulatory process at the FDA. So I think the entire system, which is now kind of what I do, going out and speaking to med schools and whatnot, the spider web, which has us trapped, and the pharmaceutical companies kind of controlling every aspect of the system. And so that is one thing that I think I did not know or never thought about. But once I really started, looking back, and I think about that very first night when the coroner asked me a question because I was out of town, and she said, "Was he on any medication?" And I said, because everything in my body was like, "There's no way he killed him. Like, this doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense." And I said, Zoloft. And she goes, "We're going to take it with us and might have something to do with his death." But everything in my body was like, "There's no way." And so, there's so much magic that lives in our bodies of the intuition of when something doesn't make sense. And so, anyways, but yeah, it was, I had a rude awakening of how much trust that I think I never even questioned. And that's where I say when life blows up, it gives you an opportunity to go, "Who told me this? Why do I believe this? Where did this come from? Whose belief is this?"
Yeah,
So,
I definitely like it can be really intimidating stepping into conversations where you're questioning your doctor or you're, possibly going against big pharma or the FDA. And I think so many people feel like, who am I? I'm not an advocate, I'm just a patient. So, why is self advocacy such a critical skill in today's healthcare system?
oh, well, first of all, I'm going to say no one's going to ever care more about you or your health than you. Like no doctor, no system, no FDA is going to care more about you and your health. And so I always say you have to be your biggest advocate. And a lot of times if you think about when you're sick, you maybe aren't at your at your like best, right? So I always say bring somebody with you and make sure you question, and there's nothing wrong with questioning your doctor, or if something intuitively doesn't make sense, like everything in your body's like all the hairs on your body are standing up, or they want to give your kid something. There's nothing wrong with you asking, because again, you are the one that's going to live with any kind of harms to your loved one. They're not going to. They can tell you what they, and remember, health is like on an average, and everybody's bodies are different, right? Everybody's health is different, and what our motivations are and how we want to live. And somebody, in asking questions, I remember I had to have some procedure done, and it was an endoscope, and I kept asking the doctor about, like, "Can you," and, "What's it gonna be like? What's it gonna feel like? What," he looked at me and he goes, "Do you know how many of these I do every single week?" And I looked at him and I was like, "Is he really talking to me like that?"
Oh
I'm
my
like, "I'm
gosh.
not questioning you and whether you're a skilled ego doctor. Like, I'm not questioning your background, your skills, like, but you're putting that thing down my body." And and of course, I live in the world of harms, which harms are actually a lot more prevalent than people realize. It's because our system wants to talk about the benefits, the pharma benefits. And if you think about it, healthcare is a big business. And as
Oh, yeah.
patients, I always say we're customers. And it drives my patient advocacy people crazy, but we are customers because like a hospital doesn't want empty hospitals. They need the
Right.
hospitals full. The pharmaceutical companies are not really, they're accountable to their shareholders. They're not accountable to you and I or to the
Exactly.
doctors. You know what I mean? So it's really important that your advocacy, and again, I'm not anti like drug, like if you need it, but I think I'm really about pro information, true informed consent, accountability, and transparency is got to be part of our, it has to be part of our healthcare system. And if it's not, and it's really not right now. So this is why you do need to be your best and biggest advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many times we hand over all of this power to doctors without even realizing how much power and authority they are, how much we are giving to them. And so I know something that you work a lot with is having black box warnings put onto drugs. Can you share an example where knowing that a black box warning, if it had existed, could have changed the outcome of a situation?
Sure. Well, a black box warning, an FDA black box warning, is the most serious of all warnings that the FDA will issue a drug. And it's usually, a lot of times black box warnings come on to the drug after it's on the market because, remember, clinical trials are set to show the best benefit of a product, not the safety and the real. And you think about it, they're going to always do the clinical trials in the most favorable position. And so the real world is where we start seeing the problems, and when millions of people start taking them. So that black box warning is like serious harms or even death. And now with the antidepressant class of drugs, when Woody got put on the drug, there was no warning, even though in 1991 there were, and that was 13 years before a warning actually got placed on the drug. The FDA held hearings on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac. And at that time, they did not do anything. And most of those members of the FDA advisory committee took monies from pharmaceutical companies. Fast forward, now we have Zoloft and we have Paxil on the market and approved for kids. And eventually, the black box warning got put on because we like forced it in 2004 for kids up to 18, and they actually stopped the black box warning at age 24. The reality is common sense says the drug doesn't know that you're 24 today and 25 tomorrow and you're no longer at risk. So it's really important to ask your doctor about if the drug has a black box warning. And even, and then there's this idea of nobody thinks harms are gonna happen to them, right? Like, I remember I went and, jumped out of I went and did skydiving because I had a Groupon, which is really stupid. My friends are like, "Wait, you went skydiving and you had a Groupon?" I'm like, "Yeah, for 50% off." But they're like, "That was really" but that's another but, you're signing away all this paperwork, right? About, like,
Yeah.
that you're taking responsibility if something happens, and you're like, "Nothing, they just have to, like." I mean, I know how I, like, looked at it. I'm like, "They just have to say that. Nothing will happen." But you know what? Harms do happen, right? And so I think we need to take harms in medicine very serious. Even if you like, and not just like brush it off or like, when the doctor, you should be asking because you should be informed that if you see something, right? Like that whole experience that Woody was having, it's a side effect called akathisia. And if I would have known, but I mean, he's telling me his head's outside his body, he's crying, like now I would see it very differently, but I didn't even know what to look for, right? Like, so warnings are very, very serious. And then there's another case example where after Chantix, which is a smoking cessation to help people stop smoking,
Yeah.
it came on the market with no black box warning. After all of these harms that emerged, they had over 2,800 lawsuits. Pfizer settled it for almost $300 million, shut up every one of the victims. Then they went back to the FDA and said, "Hey, we did another study, and there are no psychiatric side effects to the drug." And I was going to be on that committee, but I got kicked off days before. And the FDA ultimately removed the warning, and not one of the victims of those 2,800 lawsuits, nor did the FDA advisory committee even know about them, right? And
Mhm.
so that drug, for anybody who's considering it, and why it matters too is, and why sometimes the companies don't want it, is it affects the way you can advertise and promote the drug. If it has a black box warning, there's a lot more requirements than if it doesn't. And so always ask, always ask, always ask about anything that might have a warning, and push your doctors to not just assume, because everybody likes to push benefits. And,
Yeah.
I will always come from the bias of, or the intellectual bias, as they called it at the FDA, of safety, safety first.
Well, I know with your work, you have seen a lot of gaps in how the FDA protects patients versus how the pharmaceutical industry operates. Can you give us a couple examples of that?
Sure. Well, first of all, one thing that I was shocked about is I thought the FDA did clinical trials. They don't do the clinical trials. They just are literally the all to get a drug on the market, you have to go through the FDA, right? And so if you think about it, the FDA is seen as just a hurdle to get, you have to overcome to get it on the market. And you're going to want to put your best foot forward, right? So you just need to be aware of that. A lot of times it assumes that you are going to, if there's any harms, um, or they might emerge. Everybody assumes the it'll happen. Somebody will protect you after it's on the market. Well, there's a lot of cases like, just look at the antidepressants where it was 13 years before warnings came on. And so that's one thing. And you have to remember, even with advertising and marketing, and, it's on every level. Like, a doctor, once a drug's on the market, a doctor can use it any way they want. And
Yeah.
if you look at, a lot of times, like had never heard of the concept ghostwriting. I mean, you've heard of ghostwriting, but not in medical journals. Well, to find out that companies hire ghostwriters to write studies that will end up in medical journals, and then they'll go and get key opinion leaders that are doctors that might specialize in a disease or a drug, and they will put their names on it. And so the
Oh my
whole
gosh.
thing is super incestuous. Screening forms at the mental health screening forms that a lot of us fill out at the doctors, where it's like, in the last 2 weeks, have you felt sad? Those forms, like, if you look at that one particular for depression screening, was created by Pfizer Education Grant and 2 key opinion leaders. And so when you are start, and it's why I do this thing with the spider web. Also, the other thing that I found shocking is I didn't realize that in med school, like, I would have thought that they would learn how the FDA works. Like, how do drugs come on the market? How do they, like, so you could have critical thinking, because I want my doctor to be critical thinking and not just be educated by pharmaceutical reps, and especially the GPs and internists, because they have to be I'm a big, like, I was a bachelor liberal arts degree, right? You learn a lot of things, but you're a master of none, really, because
Yeah.
you're not a specialist. So you have to
Yeah.
learn a lot of things, and you have to rely on things. And so, that's the other thing with doctors. And that's why it's really important to remember that it's not just patients that are being promoted and advertised to. So are our doctors, because they need both of them to be in business.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you go to the doctor, because you have this wealth of knowledge about what questions to ask, what things to advocate for, what are 3 questions that every patient should ask their doctor before they agree to take a new prescription?
Sure. Well, one question would be, are there any, like, I want to know true informed consent. Like, is this drug necessary? And if is there another option, a lifestyle option that I could do? Could I do something with could I, like, change a diet? Could I do some exercise? Is there, like, a more functional way of dealing with it? Is there So always ask, what if is this the first option? Like, do I have to? Then I always say, ask, well, what happens if I do nothing at all? Like, what if I decide, I want to try this first? And so I think those are questions. And then also, like, what are the warnings? Because you have to remember, the a lot of times they want to sell benefit, and they're going to sell the newest, usually, because
Yeah.
it's the branded version that people come in, the drug reps they're promoting it, etc. So always challenge, and not do not be afraid of challenging and asking questions, not under that you don't trust them, but you just are like, help me understand, like, do I need to is this necessary for me to take, or my kid to take?
Yeah, absolutely. I am very fortunate in the fact that my primary care doctor, if I come to him about a question about medication, or he poses, a medication change to me, he is very educated in what the warnings are for the medication. Here's why I think you should take it. Here's what you need to watch out for. So find a provider that you can trust, that you are not afraid to go to ask questions, that is going to take the time for you to
Yeah.
ask all of those questions and feel like you're walking away with peace of mind. Now, if you have a family member that's prescribed a medication and you start noticing what you think may be side effects or warning signs or red flags, what would you suggest as a way for tracking those red flags or side effects, and how would you present that to your doctor in a way that they would actually take you seriously?
Well, I think it's really important, because if you're especially I think in the psychiatric drugs, and those especially, but really any medication, because, a
Yeah.
lot of them have side effects, right? It could be like a heart thing. It could be, and so I think, first of all, if you're the person getting the drug, I would let somebody else know that you're taking a medication, and here are the side effects. And if you start, because sometimes, especially with the psychiatric ones, you don't know that it's the drug. And so usually somebody on the outside might be like, even where Woody thought he was losing his mind. Well, I've been with him for 12, 13 years. I've never seen that behavior ever. And so, like, those would have been things that I would have recorded, like when it happened, like what, what medications, like, truthfully, I'm going to say another thing. I don't have children, but and so I think it was Wood and I, married, being adults, like I never thought twice. Like I just assumed that he knew how to take his own meds and I would take my meds. But I think that's a really important thing for starters is letting somebody else know. And if you live alone, let somebody else know. And then I think, the unfortunate part, if you don't have somebody on your file at the clinic. A lot of times they don't wanna talk to somebody who, especially if you're not the parent and now they're older, unless you put them on your and so something that my sister and I have done with my parents is we are now on their files. So if something should happen, I can call and they can talk to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's another really important aspect to remember, um, and keep track of it. If it doesn't feel right, that saying, "See something, say something," and
Yeah.
really, I think that's extremely important.
Well, you sat at the FDA table as a patient representative. Can you tell us, for people who really want to start using their voice in that area to help shape policies and practices that can impact other families, what can they do?
Great question. Well, so obviously, like I said, I got thrown into this, and most people don't understand that the FDA has, even going on their website, like the FDA advisory boards, there's advisory committees. So, like, if you're taking rheumatoid drugs or, something, there's committees that when there's new drugs, that if you, as a patient, you can sign up. There's well, first of all, you can watch them now that everything's virtual versus back in the day where you had to get on a plane. But like, let's say your family members had an experience with cardiac medicines. You can actually, and you're like afraid because most of the people that show up at those advisory committees are people who are actually paid from, or they're in the clinical trials, and they're usually all pro drugs because they're from like the companies or patient advocacy organizations that get money from pharmaceutical companies. So when you watch those advisory committees, you kind of can understand, you start seeing things. So I would say, for one thing, participate, watch those advisory committees, go get involved or go look at what the FDA has. Then, in terms of other things you can do in shaping policy, if there's things that are happening in your community and everything starts local, right? Go
Yeah.
get like on hospital boards, and there's like hospital boards that need patient voices. And I think having conversations and like, the one thing, especially again, I come from the harms side of things, but the problem that we don't realize is that it's actually a third leading cause of death. But the issue with harms is they happen one off, right? One patient at a
Yeah.
time. But if it was a whole plane that goes down, you would pay attention. And so I think this idea of connecting the dots and when there's, like if you're in a certain disease area or you're really concerned with, you know, um, diabetes too or something, there's patient groups to go in, start learning, see if there's other organizations that are doing advocacy and they need your voice because in the end, it's your voice. Like you're the target. You're the
Yeah.
target. You're the target.
Yeah.
So I think sharing your story as well.
So, going through this experience that you went through, was there a piece of advice or a truth that somebody gave you that gave you courage? Because I know in these situations you can feel so powerless, and to go up against something like the FDA, to some people, that would just be unimaginable. They're just so big. How could I ever do that? But did anybody give you a piece of advice or a truth that helped you launch this and made you keep moving forward?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was not this person before. I think when you have something like this happen, it it was part of my grieving process too, right? Like, and I think that's the thing when you've had harms done, sometimes um it becomes part of just your healing, like trying to figure out what happened and just being like, I'm not going to accept it. Like, this didn't make sense. But I also feel like, I mean, obviously, my faith was really a big piece of it. And back from the very beginning, I prayed, take my pain and use it over and over because I was like, I just wanted this pain to go away. I had no
Yeah.
idea what that was going to be. So, I think this idea of your voice matters. I had somebody say, like, you can go out there, and even I had a partner, like my brother in law, who became the one that it wasn't just me alone. He helped guide me. And so I think that's important. Um, but I think this idea that sometimes, it's super scary, but at the same time, if there's, if you're being called forward to do something and you're being called, you have to like even explore it and be curious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if Woody could see the work that you had done, what do you think he would say?
That question always, oof, it always gets me because I think, first of all, he'd be really, really proud because I didn't ever like want to get involved in taking on any issue. And I think he'd be like, I told you, Kim, you could do a lot more than just advertising. And I'm just like, I still am gonna beat the crap out of him when I see him one day because I'm like, "Really, dude, you left me with this?" Because he was the guy who would take on city council. They were putting up a couple cell phone towers in our neighborhood, and he'd be like, "Hey, let's go get," he was like, "Let's go get everybody to sign the petitions." And I'm looking, I'm like, good luck. You're taking on 2 cell phone companies and city council." And he's like, "I'd rather try like hell and lose than do nothing at all, Kim." And I was like, have fun." And then all of a sudden, like, then he dies, and I'm like, "Really? You left me Pfizer?" And so, I think he would be like, he was my greatest teacher, and I think through the pain, I also, recognize that pain is, like, one of the biggest gateways to transformation, and we try to run away and numb it, and really, the growth is on the other side, and so not being afraid of the pain.
I remember something you told me after Woody died. You said that immediately your doctor wanted to give you a prescription because you shouldn't have to feel pain. And it still shocks me that was said because, coming from your background, coming from my background, knowing that not healing that pain and not dealing with that grief, it's not just gonna affect you then, it's going to affect how your body functions for the rest of your life, and so, I think that something if you take one thing away from this conversation is always question things, always advocate for yourself, always know that it's your choice and you don't have to just take the word of one person. You can ask multiple doctors, you can get multiple opinions, and ultimately it does come down to your choice. A doctor can make you feel like you're being forced to take something, but you have to advocate for yourself and make that decision whether or not that is how you are going to move forward.
Absolutely. I think, I look back And I remember right after my doctor asked me, "Do I think I need something?" And I was like, "Well, I think the drug is what killed him." And she's looking at me like I'm, a little nutty. And then I go, "But aren't I supposed to hurt?" Like I meant
Yeah.
it like I wasn't I was just like, "Aren't I supposed to hurt? Like Woody's gone. Like he's dead."
Yeah.
And she goes, "We don't need to." And I thought, "Whoa, that is kind of like I chose not to go that route, right? Obviously for my reasons, but at the end of the day, like I'm glad that like, my body was just it wouldn't let it was just questioning it, and this idea that if it doesn't feel right, like you said, you are no one's forcing you, just because somebody has a different degree than you or they've gone to school to learn, it's still your body, it's still your kid's body, still your loved one's body that no one is going to care more about what happens than you.
Yeah.
And so that would be my message of don't be afraid to challenge, don't be afraid to question. Questions again do not mean you're anti anything. And I think, we saw it so much during the last 5 years. Questioning, questioning if it doesn't make sense is just a question.
Yeah.
It's just a question. But that question might just save your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Kim, thank you so much for your insights. I know that this is something that you're extremely passionate about, but I also know you have some upcoming projects. Would you share some of those with us?
Ooh, yes, I do have some. Well, it's funny. So I do talk a lot about, the drug safety work, which I love. It's my passion. I think there's very few people in this voice or in this space, but I am writing a book. And it's funny, I've never told this story, which, the antidepressant story's really never been told, like from the lawsuit and what it was like going to into the FDA, but also in the trenches of the FDA and like what Pfizer did during some of this kind of Aaron Brockovich meets Spotlight
Mhm.
because it's some investigation. But it's also like my journey too of like my own personal healing of what were some of the things that I did that got, through. So anyways, got that. I've got we've got a screenplay out there that's based on Woody's or it's called Woody, but it is a screenplay that's already out there being shopped, and it's a drama based on true story. And so that's one thing. And then I've got a Wild X talk coming up, which is kind of like a TEDx talk for women. And I'll be talking mostly about the power of the power of grief and the power of pain as being the gateway to using my I've got a fire. It's kind of my fire framework. And
Yeah.
so those are some of the projects I'm working on.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and with giving your amazing insight into this. It's really something that I wish and I hope that more people will take the time to educate themselves on.
Yeah, you know what? It's why I do it because I literally just got a call yesterday from another family that 39 years old, her spouse had no idea and she was watching, they were layering drug after drug after drug and it was side effects and I'm like she goes, "How come?" And she said the question that is why I keep doing it, "How come we didn't know?" I'm like, "Well, this is why I do what I'm doing because I don't want anybody else to ask that question." And obviously it'll keep happening and that's why it's personal and I don't want it to become personal to somebody. I'd rather them learn from my experience and not have to learn it them the hard way.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me. I love having these conversations and so good to see your smile.
Thank you for spending this time with me today. My hope is that something you heard sparks the courage to take one small step toward the life you were created for. If you're looking for deeper support on your journey, you'll find free resources, coaching opportunities, and ways to connect with me at my website, monicaconnollycoaching.com. And remember this: you are not too far gone, it's not too late, and you are never alone. Keep rising, keep healing, and keep believing because you, my friend, were made for so much more.